I'm Niharika Acharya, Executive Director of Events at The Hill, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to Mayors Matter, Deepening the Generational Compact in Communities. As America ages and becomes more diverse, generational inclusion is rising to the top of many a to-do list. We're looking forward to hearing from some of the most respected mayors from across the country today on how they're working to build healthy communities that include people of all ages. Not far from us, an event of historical significance is unfolding. We are glad you chose our event instead. We will not disappoint. I'd like to begin by thanking our underwriter, AARP, for making this afternoon's conversation possible. Americans are aging, and fast. According to the most recent census data, people over the age of 60 number more than 70 million. Over the next decade or so, older Americans are projected to outnumber those under the age of 18. So let that sink in a bit. These older adults are poised to work and live longer than previous generations. So it should come as no surprise that they are continuing to engage in their communities far longer than their parents' generation. Local leaders are recognizing that cities need to ensure both infrastructure and services are prepared to support this active, diverse group. In a few moments, we're going to hear from America's mayors about what they're doing to acknowledge the important role this demographic plays in the continued success of communities all across the country. First, a few quick housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here in the room, we are also live streaming on thehill.com. Please keep your phones on silent throughout the duration of the program, but we encourage you to engage in the conversation on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at The Hill Events, and join the conversation using the hashtag #TheHillMayors. We are going to be taking questions during the program, so please be on the lookout for members of our team with handheld mics. Finally, you will receive an electronic survey following the conclusion of today's event. We are always eager to hear how we can make our programs more dynamic, so I encourage you to take a few moments to provide your feedback. And now, let's dive right in. For the first conversation of this program, I am so pleased to call on stage the mayors of some of the nation's largest cities, attractive destinations for Americans young and old. So please put your hands together for the mayor of Seattle, Washington, Jenny Durkan, Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami, Florida, and the mayor of Fort Worth, Texas, Betsy Price. Joining the mayors on stage is our own Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Niharika. It's such a pleasure with all of you. We really thought many more of you would be at the impeachment thing. So glad you're here. There's food, there's it. But let's turn this into a fun conversation today. We've got an intimate enough room, a crowded room with great energy to have some encounters with people who are shaping our future and working in cities with the many, many different challenges. We're taking a slice of that today. I lost a battle. I mean, my team hates when I confess battles I've lost with them. But I guess we're calling this Mayors Matter. I really want to call this, does 50 plus matter? So you know, when we're talking today a little bit about intergenerational bond building, what we're really saying is, you know, are folks that are 50 plus, do they have a place in our society? Are they being squeezed out? Are they liabilities? Are they assets? And so, Mayor Durkan, let me start with you and ask you, how do you approach the future of Seattle and the hard choices you have with different communities, but also the 50 plus community?
Yeah, great question. So thanks all for being here, and I know that the other mayors will disagree with me, but Seattle really is the best city in America right now. And we have grown so quickly. In the last 4 to 5 years, we've grown by about 140,000 people. And most of that growth has happened without an increased growth for housing. We have cost of living has increased so significantly. A small one-bedroom apartment goes for about $1,700 a month. The median house is $750,000. So seniors on a fixed income are really getting squeezed in our market. If they own their house, they've seen their property taxes increase to the point where some people are paying more in property tax than they paid in their original mortgage on their house. And others who are in the rental market can't find a place to live. So we have to be super intentional about how do we make sure that we are creating a city that in the future really is diverse, that it has seniors aging in place, it has intergenerational families, that our communities of color have not been pushed out. And so we try to do it both at the high level and also at the very specific level. So we are, if you look at all the challenges a city faces today, housing and transportation are two of the biggest, and those really affect our senior community. We want a city that mobility is easy, people can walk to where they need to get, that we have housing that is affordable near the places they want to live, and that they're in and around multiple generations.
What is not going as well in Seattle as much as you would like it to?
Look, we reflect the changing times in America. I think the shift in the economy has been transformational, and I think history will say that we are living in a time more transformational than the Industrial Revolution. And as that economy has shifted, so many people have been left behind. So we can highlight that very clearly. We have, there was an article recently in the national press that said that 5 cities in America have gotten 90% of the jobs created in the tech economy. Seattle's one of them. So those 5 cities in America, 90% of the jobs. With that has had this enormous influx of high-paying salaries, vitality, people from all over the world. But then there are those who are locked out. And the bridges to that economy have been shut. So we really have to be looking at how do we make Seattle more affordable for more people? How do we make sure that there's true economic opportunity, both for our youth coming up, but also for seniors and whatever their second and third acts are? So those are some of the things we're really working on.
Mayor Price, thank you so much, Mayor Durkan. Mayor Price, and you guys are all ready for this. Do you think Seattle is the best city in the United States?
No, of course not. Fort Worth is, and he would say it's Miami.
No, I had to set that up. But let me ask you a question we were just talking about. You know, I've spent some time with the mayor.
Once.
I've had some fun times with Mayor Price. Mayor Price, tell it as it is, which I know you will, on whether I'm intrigued on whether these communities, you know, millennials we hear a lot about, we hear about 50-plus community, or the elder community, we have different ways of framing that, on whether they are at each other's throats and there's a zero sum between their interests in a city, or whether there are ways to bring them together. And I know you're very direct about this, so what's the answer?
Yeah, we don't see that they're at each other's throat. Both generations, the millennials, the older seniors, of which I'm one, probably the oldest one up here, so we're all going to live a lot longer.
I have makeup on.
You look good, Steve. I do too, but I'm not sure it covered all those sins. But, you know, you have the Gen Xers in the middle, and everybody brings something special to the table. And everybody has their own needs at different points in their life, and there is so much to be learned from our senior members, and there's so much for them to learn from Gen Xers.
But they don't come packaged with that. I mean, that's the kumbaya answer. I mean, how do you actually create that interest and curiosity across lines? Because I know you do it.
Yeah, we do. You have to get out and get them engaged, and you have to engage people at each end and give them a chance to interact, whether it's at your community center, whether it's at the YMCA and Silver Sneakers and the Young Early Learning Alliance. We have an Early Learning Alliance, and part of our benefit with our Early Learning Alliance, and this is children cradle to kindergarten, is 50% of the volunteers helping with them are seniors. It's a good chance to interact. We have Read Fort Worth, which is our literacy program. 60% of our volunteers in Read Fort Worth are seniors working with high school, elementary, and middle school kids. I think communication is the key. We do, as we talked about earlier, engagement has been one of the hallmarks of my administration for 9 years, and we've done everything. And I'm a cyclist. I'll admit I'm one of those crazy people that shows up in spandex and a helmet. But we do rolling town halls on bicycles in different parts of the community, all over the city, and a large majority of our cyclists are seniors. But we also have kids, millennials, and Gen Xers. It's a great opportunity. If you're pedaling hard on a 105-degree day in the Texas heat, and you got somebody younger than you that's willing to reach out and give you a hand up, it's a great benefit and a great chance afterwards to have a cocktail with them and talk about
Francis has his town halls on surfboards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you got to do
Paddleboards.
caffeinated town halls, and you just have to really reach out and make a concerted effort to connect the groups.
So Francis, thank you so much. Francis, Mayor Suarez, you know, I have had the pleasure of talking to a number of the people who work for you. And it's interesting because they're, you know, oftentimes you meet people who work for mayors and they're, you know, kind of, you know, get really tight. It's tough. They don't have fingernails. They actually like you, and they're proud of the fact they have this line. They say, our mayor created the earned income tax credit for housing, and so tell us about that, because I have heard this line 3 times today and previously, that there's a deal of civic pride that you're moving the needle on affordable housing.
Well, first of all, the NFL thinks that Miami objectively is the best city because the Super Bowl is going to be there in a couple weeks. But no, what we noticed and what we learned is that there's an affordable housing crisis, not only in the city, but certainly it's acute amongst our elderly. Our elderly are living on fixed incomes.
Right.
They're living on Social Security. And we did a deep dive to see what happens when they are even living in affordable housing units. There's this presumption that if they're in an affordable housing unit, they've won the lottery. They've made it, if you will. Because what elderly in this generation have to look forward to in retirement is work, right? So what we noticed in our statistics was that their rents were going up at twice the rate that their Social Security payments were going up. And what we realized is that meant that they had to make very, very tough choices. Choices that most of us in this room don't have to make, which is, do we pay for cable or do we disconnect our cable? Can we go and buy groceries? Are we going to be able to pay the electric bill at the end of the month? So we created a rental assistance program that is based on cost burden, and those that are significantly cost burdened seniors in our community. It's the first of its kind, as far as I know, in the nation. And what we're seeing is we have seniors that are paying 80-90% of their income in rent. And so you combine that with what you see in both of these cities, which is a significant amount of gentrification, which is putting a tremendous amount of pressure and pushing people out. And we've combined that with a climate gentrification home repair program. So we're trying to do everything that we can to keep people in their homes.
Climate gentrification, explain, I have no idea what that means.
So what we're seeing...
Do any of you know what that means? You got to get better at this.
Yeah.
So what is a climate gentrification?
It's a first of its kind, too, in the nation.
Good, yeah?
You created it.
So, right, we created it. I created the term, too. It's
teaser.
Yeah,
a teaser.
I know.
You bit.
Right, you bit.
Yeah,
You got
exactly.
hooked.
So
what we're
tell
seeing,
me more.
Of course. So what we're seeing in the city of Miami is, or we're measuring the possibility of climate gentrification. In other words, because some of our wealthier communities are coastal communities, with sea level rise and other climatic phenomenon, there is the worry that people are going to start buying inland, where some of our poorer communities are and some of our elderly communities are. So what we did was we created a fund for those in those communities that can actually make their homes more resilient, whether it's putting a new roof or whether it's impact windows, things that are cost prohibitive for many elderly in our community because they cost $10,000 and $20,000. And the only proviso is it's a forgivable loan. So after 10 years, they don't have to pay it back, but they can't flip their home. They can't sell their home within that period of time. And so it prevents, it stems the tide of gentrification that we see happening in all of our cities, but it's being exacerbated in cities like Miami by the climate phenomenon.
We don't call it climate gentrification, but we do the same thing with CDBG, which is community block grant funds and city funds for home repairs in lower income areas, and seniors get priority on it. First piece goes if you have a homestead on your home and you're over 65, and if you're over 65 in Fort Worth, your property taxes are frozen. Your value can still go up, but the taxes themselves have a freeze on it to the dollar amount the year that you turn 65. And if you need home repairs, then you're first in line for those dollars there.
Probably just got a lot more people moving to
Come on to Fort Worth.
Mayor Durkan, you, I know, have also struggled with the housing issue, and I was intrigued that you're beginning to look at different communities like LGBTQ community and age communities there and kind of find housing solutions on those fronts. Can you give us some insight into what housing needles you're moving on income, and then is there, I'm really interested in Seattle because it's such an incredible place, Starbucks and Amazon and Microsoft, vast wealth, and yet you're having to do these things. And so what's the misconnect between, the Bezos crowd, who's also in town here now, but that crowd and trying to fill these market failures, if you will, for real people?
Yep, I think it is those splits that we're seeing, the schisms. That is, one, you've got the rise of the new economy that requires a very specific type of background to get into it. A lot of it computer and tech based. You have the old economy, which the wages have not kept up, and then you have the rise of the gig economy that doesn't have any of the employee protections.
Right.
And so we've been really focused on how do we look at each piece of those puzzles. And in housing, we saw that there are gaps in a number of areas. We have in some of our communities, particularly in the areas where we had a large African American population. When I was growing up in Seattle, it was over 70% African American. Today it's less than 14%. In our Chinatown International District, we're seeing really pressures there because it's close to the city. So how do we build housing for those communities? So we build projects in those communities and added a community preference. So for our low-income housing, as we build new things, we give the people from the community the first shot so that they can stay in community. We've also focused on some of the seniors. We have LGBTQ, and we saw there was no easy place for those to live, so we had our first city-financed low-income housing development for LGBTQ. And so really looking at where we can keep community in place and let them age in place has been a focus of ours because, you know, it is those seniors, which I am proud to get my senior discount everywhere I go. It is, you can see that there's such an asset to cities. From their experience, from what they add to vitality, from their wisdom, but also whatever the second and third chapters are. But if they can't stay in a city, you lose that. And so you've got to make sure that you're having all your programs, like the ones we're talking about here, and how do you bookend those with, you know, low, reduced fares for transportation and buses and light rail? How do you make sure your utility bills and property taxes, that you have a combination of discounts? So one thing we did for the first time ever is we did a data dive and found that most of the people who were eligible for a reduced property taxes or utilities because of either their income or their age weren't using it. So we created a portal, affordability portal, working with our tech companies, helped us build it.
Right.
So there's one-stop shopping. You can go there, you can put your zip code, your income, and it tells you all the programs you're eligible for, and then gives you links to sign up for them. So part of it is just making sure people know where they can go to make it more affordable in Seattle for them.
You know, we just had another room, a side meeting over here, and we have Brian Barnett, the mayor of Rochester Hills, Michigan, who's president of the U.S. Mayors, and I guess we have 270 mayors who are going to be in Washington over the next couple of days.
Watch out.
In like a big, you know, it's like a big show and tell. I don't know if you're going to
And
show
they all
Washington.
think they're from the best city.
Yeah, they all think it's the best city. But you all have like little
none of us
things.
are
I mean,
running for
it's
president.
interesting because we have Congress here, we have the federal level, which isn't working, which is clearly paralyzed. I mean, that's a fact that's paralyzed today. But I'm interested in the incubators that each of your cities represent and the show and tell you're about to go through, and whether you need this town or not, whether the resources that you have, the models you have among each other, does the federal government at some point just become irrelevant to the direction and the course you're setting, or do the resources that Washington provides, are they still important to you?
Yeah, the resources are still important because clearly every dollar up here is our money. It comes from you, either directly on your income tax or indirectly on other taxes. So the ability to be here for mayors to lobby, for council members to lobby, to how it gets sent back to us and how it's, you know, we would love to come and lobby that it comes with less strings because every one of you would agree mayors are where the rubber hits the road.
We are the rubber.
We are the rubber, yeah. You can't go to church. You can't often say you can't go to the beauty shop or get your nails done. What somebody comes up and walks in and says, Mayor, you need to fix my street light, or you need to fix my pothole. And that it's got to be done. And when you dial 911, they expect a police or fire officer to show up and water. And so you have to come to Washington and lobby. And you hope that the people that are here are listening and that they will put less bureaucracy on us. And it matters because they send dollars back to us. Now, they don't and shouldn't shape our policy. Our policies on healthy communities, on transit, have to be shaped in our local community, but they can help facilitate the funds to come with that.
Mayor Suarez?
So we take an approach that we deal with our issues mostly in-house, and we don't rely on Washington or the state, for that matter. When we get help from the state or from the federal government, it's sort of like icing on the cake. But certainly, I think they really should be involved. I mean, like you know, as Betsy said, that we're paying these taxes as well, and there are major issues that require tremendous budgets. I mean, when we're talking about mass transit, you're talking about usually multi-$100 million solutions. When you're talking about any climate adaptation, you're talking about multi-$100 million solutions, if not billion-dollar solutions. So, we certainly have resources, and our residents have done things that are unusual, like voting to tax themselves to solve some of these problems because they're so acute. But certainly it'd be great to have a matching component, and we're trying to get the federal government to see the wisdom of matching on housing, matching on transportation, and matching on resiliency, which are issues that a lot of major cities are grappling with.
And long term, it reduces the dollars that have to come from Washington
Absolutely.
when they match with our local dollars.
Absolutely.
Mayor Durkan?
Yeah, I would echo this. I might say, first, I think all mayors would agree the number one thing we want from the federal government is to stay out of our way.
Yeah.
And not to impede us. And I do think that cities have become the laboratory for America. People used to say that about states, but I think it is the cities. I think we are piloting some of the most progressive programs everywhere from preschool to free college to you name it. But at some point, if they work, we want to scale them nationwide. The best part of the conferences for mayors is for us to talk to each other, to learn what's working, what's not working. That needs to be done at a federal level. Those resources need to be put to work for America, because America was not envisioned as a bunch of city-states. It was envisioned as this unified country. And so I think that the federal government needs to, in some ways, be a better partner to stand up and say, if we see that this works, if the next generation of Americans know that we are going to be stronger as a nation, if kids have really good preschool and healthy meals, we're going to make sure that happens in every city in America.
Let me ask you each, just as the final question, I want to go to all of you. I have a piece that I think is coming in. We have a special report with mayors, and some of Jenny, you have a piece in there. Betsy, I think you might too. And we have profiles of what's coming in, but kind of looking at these inclusion on a lot of fronts, but also this intergenerational question. But I got intrigued with the power, what I would call, I'm not going to get this right, so I apologize in advance. We all have powerful women conferences, and they're gluts of them. But the most powerful voter in the country is probably the least powerful woman. 50, 60 years old, financially strapped, running hard. 95% of those women vote, and a lot of those women are frustrated with their circumstances. And I'm interested in whether there's a sensitivity to that powerful voter out there and her frustrations and her challenges. And if you look at its healthcare, and even student debt is one of it, because so many parents take over their children's student debt, and it becomes, frankly, elder debt. In this, and I'm interested in whether or not that's in the calculus of how you're thinking about the sensitivities you're reaching. Jenny?
I would say, if you look at the Women's March and everything else, it's time to get out of the way and let women do it. I don't mean that to be, but it's just like we are at a time now where it's like, okay, we got a harness, and it's time to take over.
Yeah.
And support people, but it's like we know that women have, number one, economically suffered the most in our country if you look across all demographic groups. And you look at the burden of raising children, almost always placed on the women. Leaving the workforce to raise the children, almost always the women. People who take parental leave and never come back. And I think, but if you also look at the resource that is available, don't do it because that's where the vote is. Do it because if you do it, you're going to have a smarter, better community.
And you think that this community is reorganizing itself in a way that they're not deep.
I do. I think it's kind of no mas.
Yeah.
We're done.
Right.
It's time for action.
And I think
Francis?
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Many of these senior women that you're seeing, and not just 50, but 60 and 70 and more, are outliving their husbands. And now they're in the driver's seat on the finances. They're in the driver's seat. And you never make policy based on one specific group. But clearly you listen to every group, and that's a group that's become very vocal, as they should be. But I believe everybody brings something to the table, and you're listening to all these groups. And that group of senior women, they're your best volunteers. If you're looking for great philanthropic people, at a smaller scale and great volunteers, they're the first ones I'll tap lots of times and say, we got this need, I need 20 volunteers to work on it. And it's the senior sisters that we call first. And they may reach down and bring their husbands if they're there, and their sons and their daughters and their grandchildren with them, but they're the best to step up and help.
So that's looking at the elder community as asset, not liability.
Absolutely,
Francis?
it's an asset.
I'm always surrounded by powerful women.
We got them right where we want him.
That's right.
I have no
Come
brother.
on my couch.
Yes, ma'am. I have no brothers, 3 sisters, a wife, and a mother. And my father works for them. But definitely in our community, mis abuelitas, my grandmothers, if you will, my proxy grandmothers, I call them, they are incredibly powerful, incredibly engaged, and they have a lot of needs. And they're not afraid to tell you what their needs are. And the reason why we developed this elderly rental program was by interacting with them, was by going and visiting to the senior centers and areas where they live, and they literally will grab you, and they'll tug you, and they will tell you, ¿a dónde está mi vivienda? You know, where's my unit, my housing unit? And then once they got a housing unit, well, look, I can't pay for cable, or I can't, you know. So I think to be a good public policy maker, I think everybody would agree, every mayor would agree, first and foremost, you have to be a good listener. And if you're reflective of what are the needs, then you can go back to your staff, the ones that like me so much, and say, hey guys and women, what are we going to do to solve this problem? Because we have, I'm sure each person here, Seattle, Fort Worth, we have over $1 billion budget, right? You know, and so the question is, how are you prioritizing that budget? And what are you doing to move the needle to allow people to live in dignity with a quality of life, particularly at the later stage of their life, where they're not going to be able to make more money, they're not going to be able to go out into the workforce most likely, and they want to live in dignity and with dignity and deserve to live in dignity, particularly given what they've done for us, for our generation, and given us everything essentially.
And we haven't talked at all about retraining our senior workers. That's a reskilling is the big word now.
Well, I mean,
that's a really big thing with the community colleges and the universities now, and you've
Right.
got to offer that tuition and that ability to come back. They need to connect with whoever's teaching it, and it's got to be, in many cases, our community college offers it for free if you're over 60.
You know, I want, go ahead, Jenny.
I was going to say, and there's some things you can do that at the time seem small, but have a magnified impact. For example, one of the things I was able to put in place was to give free transit cards to every Seattle public school student. So kids had the way to get around our city. And the more we worked and saw phenomenally how this opened up frontiers for people, I started going into some of our senior centers, and particularly our low-income senior housing, and finding that they too were basically homebound and didn't have access to many of the parts of our city and the amenities. So we started giving them both reduced and sometimes free transit. And the stories about how it changed their lives, their ability to get to their doctor, their ability to go to the places downtown that are some of the most remarkable public realm we have, but they didn't have access to it. So I think as a city, you have to be thinking, what are those things we take for granted? That if we turn the dial here, it's going to open up so much livability and opportunity for folks.
Well, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I would love to have another forum, another day with the three of you on lifelong learning, on training, on the credentialing that's going on across the spectrum, but also, you know, with the 50-plus community, because they've got so many assets. So how do you free up that talent and make it nimble and make it part, which is a whole nother conversation. But we've got a few minutes for questions here. And can I just say thank you to all of you at the door? Like, I just want you to know it is not lost on me that you're standing here and that we don't have enough seats. And as I told some of you, I thought you were all going to be at impeachment. But we're grateful to you. So we'll figure it out. We'll squeeze you in and whatever. But thank you. Yes, right here we've got a question. Comment? Oh, a seat. I don't care about seats right now. This gentleman here, right here. Yes, hi. And we've got a microphone there. We're streaming online. Okay, good, great. No, we've got TV. So.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'd like to just say first and foremost that I agree with the NFL and Mayor Suarez. Miami is the best city.
Okay.
You both have wonderful cities as well. But now I turn to something a little more serious. The average age of Fortune 500 CEOs, mayors, senators, governors is on the average high 50s, low 60s. The median wealth of people in that age group is in cases triple or quadruple that of people in their late 20s or early 30s. Based on what I've heard today, how do you respond to the impression that is given off that you're blunting the impact of economic changes that affect us all and basically giving away stuff to people who already have most of the wealth and power in this country?
Thank you. Francis?
Sure. So in the case of Miami, I can tell you that that is not the narrative. In other words, the elderly in our community, like I said, are living on $700, $800, $900 a month in rent. In income, and they're paying 80 to 90% of their income in rent. So they are, by any measure, by any definition, severely cost burdened. Usually 30% of your income or more is cost burdened. 50% is severely cost burdened, and we have people that are paying 80 to 90%. So in the case of Miami, which is, experiencing the same growth, explosion of growth, attraction of investment, that's all happening in Miami, just like it's happening in these cities. In the elderly population, you don't see, it's not a wealthy city. In fact, it's a very, very poor city. And we're doing everything we can to help them live in dignity. To me, that's the most important part, which is they've done everything for us. They helped, in my case, my grandparents who are not alive, obviously helped me be educated,
Right.
helped me get to where I am today. And how are we giving back to them who are living beyond paycheck to paycheck, probably borrowing money or getting subsidized by their family members?
I would say to your question, though, real quickly, that it raises really important questions about
Without a doubt.
inequality within that age spectrum and why it is what it is. So because I asked the question earlier about zero-sum games between generations, but within a generation is also a legitimate question. Yes, right here.
Hello, and I thank you all for coming. Steve, it's always a pleasure. Mayor Durkan, you said that, women are kind of no mas. And so with that, my twin's father is a boomer. I'm Gen X, I have a millennial, and then I have some Gen Yers. And with that, and knowing that there are innate skills that kind of can be applied, that we can create economy and workforce development, I would love to know where the mayoral stance is on kind of working to with government to remove certain legislations and regulations that would then free up that human capital that we're talking about and those assets that are kind of built within these generations.
I'm going to give this to Betsy and Francis as well so that we can wrap up here. But go ahead, Jenny.
I think you've hit it on the nail. I think we have to do it in a very intentional way across the spectrum. And we have to be looking for where those barriers are and how do we fix it. Let me give you an example. Uber Lyft drivers. They're one of the biggest gig economy sectors in the city of Seattle, but the amount of time people spend behind the wheel, their actual minimum wage is well below our $15 minimum wage. And so we put in place, after working with the companies and everyone else, a minimum wage and expenses, real expenses for drivers. We have a study in the field, we'll put it in place. We also put into place one of the first legislations in the nation on domestic workers, to make sure that domestic workers not only got paid adequate wages, but they got rest breaks and the like. So looking at the various sectors where there can be those kind of different generational types to make sure that the industries that attract those gig workers are treating workers fairly.
Thank you. Betsy Price?
Yeah, I think you have to take into account where everybody is on the spectrum and what they're doing. We're just about out of time, but you really have to be aware and open and listening, and you don't want to put barricades in place. It's oftentimes not about removing what's there, although many times it is, but more often than not, it's the policies that people want placed. You can't vote to the small group that's going to put barriers in the way of other groups. You have to weigh those out and see what the impact is on everybody's lives.
Francis, I'm going to give you the last word, strangely,
Good.
here. But if you answer this question, but I'm also interested in, because you put your housing plan. If you were to add another big hurdle to get over in your plan, what would that be?
More money. Okay. Listen, we started with $1 million, and we know that it's a drop in the bucket. We know that it's going to help about 700-800 seniors. And we know we're in the process of finalizing a housing master plan, affordable housing master plan, that we know needs to create and renovate about 50,000 units. So we're talking about orders of magnitude. Mm-hmm. But frankly, as was being said by Jenny, the reason why we come up here is to get ideas. Mm-hmm. We come up here to listen. We come up here to
Right.
discuss these issues with each other, because you know, we like to borrow each other's ideas and then come home and brand them as our own. You know?
They don't know.
Well, with that, I want to thank you. You know, this in a way, this conference started as an idea with Nancy Lamont. You'll hear from her later, and Jenny Durkan. Jenny and I met at the City Lab conference here in Washington and began discussing some of these various issues. So I want to thank all of you, but Jenny Durkan and Mayor of Seattle, thank you for at least planning this idea with me. Yep. Francis Suarez, thank you so much for you and your team, which is great. Betsy Price, we're going to see each other in Fort Worth again soon, I'm sure. Thank you all. Please welcome, and we'll be back with the next panel soon.